What's up guys, hello to Football Talk here, back for the second half of this little mini-series where I ask and sort of try to answer one pivotal question for all 32 franchises as we look ahead to the 2024 NFL season. This can be about a specific player, coach, position, schematic nuance, really whatever. I try to stay away from generic stuff, like guys returning from injury, can someone repeat his previous success or similar ideas. Really, I just sat down for each of these franchises and thought about what immediately pops to my head before looking through rosters, refreshing my mind on player acquisitions and departures, how coaching staffs could function, etc. I do have timestamps down below for each team if you just want to hear about your favorite one, but I'll encourage you to also check out the NFC video if you like this type of analysis. And then if you really want to dive into the roster makeups of teams, I did recently finish my extensive divisional draft and roster review series, where I ran through every single player drafted by each team and discussed what the roles could look like. Along with that, you can also head over to my site hellotofootballtalk.com, where I released an article on the most improved position groups across the NFL last week, and feel free to follow me on social media. All the links are down below in the video description. Just one more thing, if you do find the information or analysis I provide helpful, please just hit that like button for me and consider subscribing to the channel. Let's get things started now, however, with the AFC North, and in particular the Baltimore Ravens, and a question for them: can all these young pieces make up for the departures that they've had? The Ravens just hosted the AFC Championship as the conference's #1 seed, with the MVP at quarterback and the league's #1 defense by DVOA. They do bring back last year's leaders in passing, rushing, receiving, sacks, and total passes defensed, so I'm not worried about them completely falling off here, but they did miss a huge opportunity to advance to the Super Bowl when they had a vulnerable Chiefs team at home, and I don't think people realize how many significant contributors are no longer in Baltimore. While he never lived up to the $50 million contracts that they paid him for one season, Odell Beckham Jr. is gone, so are the top two running backs on the depth chart heading into the year. They traded a star at right tackle for the last couple of years, let both starting guards walk in free agency, and the same is true for Pro Bowlers defensively on the edge, at linebacker and safety between Jadeveon Clowney, Patrick Queen and Geno Stone. It certainly doesn't help that the latter two have now switched to division rivals, or that they lost the defensive coordinator Mike McDonald and one of the key assistants on that side of the ball in Anthony Weaver. This obviously isn't new for contenders who paid a quarterback near top of the market money and locked up a defensive player this offseason like Justin Madubuike for nearly $100 million over the next 4 years, with about 3/4 of that guaranteed. However, this is definitely one of those situations where a lot of the contracts ran out in the same year for them, and they need the newest draft class to contribute fairly early. They did sign one of the all-time great running backs in Derrick Henry, who will be looking to defy recent history at the position as a 30-year-old. The Ravens have now finished top 3 in rushing all 6 years since they drafted Lamar, and been #1 in half of those. What the King could provide as a legit difference maker, handling the majority of carries, will be important to control games, as they have new starters, and quite a few of those quasi or actual rookies acclimating to the pros still. Next with the Cincinnati Bengals, and for them I'm wondering, how do they cut down the number of explosive plays on defense that they allowed? Unless T. Higgins ends up holding out to something similar, I feel like we have a pretty good idea about what this offense would look like, as they've put together a big O-line to run the gap scheme stuff from a shotgun and get the ball out quickly in the pass game. And then we'll see if they do convince Joe Burrow to go on the center a little bit more, or if they can construct a play-action game from the gun to hit vertical shots out of, as the number of explosives went down recently. Something on that side of the ball that I'm very interested in is what the usage of tight ends will look like. We've seen guys like Z.J. Uzomah and Hayden Hurst become meaningful contributors for this offense and be featured more heavily in key matchups, when opposing defenses were more focused on slowing down those weapons at wide receiver. They signed more of a power forward and red zone target than Mike Gesicki, but also drafted a couple of guys in the middle rounds. Instead, however, here, I'm more focused on putting less pressure on the offense to constantly score, after they shockingly turned into one of the most vulnerable units across the league when it comes to surrendering big plays, which they had been one of the best at avoiding those and giving the AFC's top quarterbacks trouble with the way they changed the picture on them post-snap. Last season they finished 25th in EP per play on defense. They allowed a league worst rate of pass plays to gain 20+ yards at 12.9%, and they were one of a league high 18 explosive runs allowed. Losing those two veteran safeties that had been the key communicators showed up with coverage busts. They lost Ken Taylor-Britt as the top guy in man, and too many of those young guys that they relied upon didn't step up. So now bringing back Ron Bell and pairing up on the back end with former Raven Geno Stone, coming off a season where he intercepted 7 passes, you address the defensive interior with Sheldon Rankings and a couple of day 2 draft picks. Personally, I think defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo will figure this out, with the majority of the issues having been on early downs. Bringing us to the Cleveland Browns, and for them I've written down, does Deshaun Watson finally look anything like a franchise quarterback again? This feels very much like a layup, but I just had to take it here, because there may not be another singular player who provides a higher range of outcome individually and in terms of his meaning for team success than Deshaun and the Browns. Solely due to the variance on the defensive side of the ball from year to year, they may be in for some regression after finishing number 1 in EP per play, third down success rates, and several other major categories. However, other than wondering if Jordan Hicks can replace Anthony Walker at the Mike linebacker spot, they bring back pretty much the entire unit. The crux with them is what we saw in the wildcard round loss to the Texans, when CJ Stroud and company really attacked those single high safety structures and generally had a lot of success against the fairly predictable back end. So as good as they were and the role defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz played in the rise to an elite unit, can he bring in some change-ups and challenge opponents in different ways when they get to those pivotal singular matchups? Now back to what has really held this team back, however, the quarterback position. Through week 12 in 2022, with Jacoby Brissett under center, this was the number 6 offense in EP per play, and even last season, Joe Flacco went from his couch to winning comeback player of the year, thanks to the advantageous looks that Kevin Stefanski created for that unit. Yet, among the 58 quarterbacks with 200 plus dropbacks over these last 2 years, Deshaun ranked 44th individually in the metric. Whether it's feel for or comfort inside the pocket, decision making, or accuracy generally, he simply hasn't found any type of consistency. This past season, they tried to sort of merge the under-center wide zone stuff that they previously majored in with more of a spread out shotgun look to make the quarterback comfortable, but it never quite happened. They traded for Jerry Jeudy this offseason, which was really interesting as he's not the type of time-based receiver you typically associate with that type of offense, and Nick Chubb is coming off a major knee injury, so it'll be interesting how willing this coaching staff is to put more into the hands of the quarterback when he's already struggled like this. Now the final team of the AFC North, the Pittsburgh Steelers. For them I'm wondering, is this offensive line a strength by this season already? I've talked about the Steelers O-line to a great extent already this offseason, so I'll try to make this a little bit shorter here. Over the last 1.5 calendar years, no team in the league has invested more resources into that unit, even if they didn't own a top 10 pick or threw big money at a free agent necessarily. Last offseason, they signed a 17-game starter at left guard in Isaac Samalu, a swing interior guy Nate Herbig, and drafted George Broderick Jones in the middle of the first round, who started once on the left side and then the final 10 games at right tackle. This offseason, they focused more on the draft, where they spent their first, second, and early 4th round pick between Washington's Troy Fautanu, West Virginia's Zach Frazier, and South Dakota State's Mason McCormick. The expectation is that Fautanu and Jones man the tackle spots, Frazier takes over at center, where they've really struggled to get consistent play since the later years of Marquise Pouncey 5 seasons ago already, and McCormick battles for the primary backup gig at both guard spots. On paper, that unit has a chance to become one of the better front 5s across the NFL. The question now becomes how quickly they're ready to perform at that type of level. Looking at Jones' rookie numbers from the PFF database, he only surrendered more than 3 pressures in one game and was penalized just twice. With the rookie class this year, we obviously don't have any sample size in the pros, but you're talking about the Pac-12 lineman of the year, with well over 1,000 pass blocking snaps alone over the last 2 seasons, a back-to-back All Pac-12 center who has mastered the art of outside zone, which will be the primary run scheme they'll be using, and the new offensive coordinator Arthur Smith, and a perennial OFCS guard with 57 career starts. So in terms of collegiate experience at least, and how much scoring reports on them look like, they should be about as pro-ready as you're going to find. That brings us to the second division now in the AFC East, first up with the Buffalo Bills, and for them I've written down which of these skill position players can they truly rely upon. Following the divisional round loss to the Chiefs yet again, I wrote an extensive piece on Buffalo's rise to being one of the mainstays at the top of the AFC, heartbreaking playoff departures in recent years, and what the future could look like for them. I threw out the idea that they may be in for a massive overhaul of the roster, with some of the veteran deals they needed to cut ties with, and how this may be signaling a short down period as they're regrouping before trying to make another run at the Super Bowl while still having quarterback Josh Allen in his prime. That precursor clearly became reality as they cut or let walk both the starting safeties and cornerback Tre'Davious White, who had been key contributors ever since head coach Sean McDermott and general manager Brandon Beane arrived in 2017. On offense, they released center Mitch Morse, let one wide receiver in Gabe Davis sign elsewhere, and traded Stephon Diggs to the Texans as part of a deal that felt like they really want to move on simply from him. Now, however, we have to question who Josh is going to spread the ball between. Looking at these two wideouts alone, they have 241 targets from last season walking out the door, along with some ancillary options. Curtis Samuel has had productive stretches, as someone who can also be an extension of the run game, but only in one of his 7 seasons has he reached 700 receiving yards. And while I liked seeing them trade back for a couple of extra picks in the draft, the guy they selected at the top of the 2nd round in Keon Coleman isn't known as a true separator, but they've openly mentioned playing the X for them already. I'm a big fan of Khalil Shakir and the things he showed over the latter half of this past season, but the combination of Mac Hollins, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and Chase Claypool, who reportedly has been the most consistent receiver during OTAs, doesn't scream reliability. Even running back James Cook had some devastating drops last season, which is part of why I could see rookie Ray Davis from Kentucky share playing time more evenly than some others might expect. Next up, the Miami Dolphins. For them, my question is, what does the next innovation or adaptation of this offense look like? Where the Dolphins actually will have significant turnover in terms of the way they operate is defensively, with Vic Fangio deciding to move on to Philadelphia and Anthony Weaver coming over from Baltimore after years as one of the more well-respected assistants on that side of the ball. Both the starters on the edge are coming off major injuries. They need to replace Christian Wilkins on the interior, while swapping on a starting linebacker and corner, along schematic changes, particularly in terms of willingness to move the pieces around. However, while the changes may not be as drastic, we know that Mike McDaniel is one of the more innovative offensive minds of the game, and he's shown the ability to continually evolve his offensive system. Last season it meant making that short out motion a staple of the menu, which we've seen teams at all levels adapt now in different ways, and going to more traditional play action compared to the quick hitting RPO game that has been so prevalent for them. Because the guy calling the plays for Miami seems to have been a step ahead consistently, I don't think we can just predict exactly what the next step in this looks like, but based on the personnel additions that they've made, we can wonder about a few of those new ingredients. Do we see Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle more on the same side of the formation if Odell Beckham Jr. looks good enough during off-season activities to be isolated on the backside? Can Jonnu Smith be used leaking into the flats as another way to stretch the defense horizontally because of what he brings after the catch when leverage dictates it? Do they go to a little more two-back stuff with 2 actual halfbacks after spending another early day free pick on Tennessee's Jalen Wright? And while it's nothing new altogether necessarily, our return motion is a bigger part of the menu, where he brings someone across the center and then back towards the side of his original alignment. I'm fascinated to see what they're cooking up. Bringing us to the New England Patriots, where I'm sure a lot of the fans wonder, have they put enough around Drake May to feel comfortable about throwing him out there early? This past season was the bottom of the barrel in terms of offensive football in New England, after 20 years of Tom Brady and even a promising start to Mac Jones' career. This wasn't nearly just about the quarterback position, however. Offensive coordinator Bill O'Brien could not provide significantly better systematic advantages or build upon the success he and Mac had together at Alabama. None of the pass catchers could consistently create separation outside of what was a part-time contributor in Pop Douglas, and they averaged just under 4 yards per carry in the run game. Defensively, they were actually a top 10 unit in both DVOA and DP per play, despite losing the top pass rusher and corner fairly early on. And I like that Gerard Mayo and that reorganized front office are already prioritizing keeping the good young pieces around. Before re-signing Kyle Duggar and then also Christian Barmore this offseason, they had not handed a player they drafted across the first 3 rounds of the draft a new contract since 2013. That is wild. With that being said, they also focused on more of the contributors they want to put around the quarterback they selected third overall to be guys they bring in alongside him and who will be there long term. Drafting Washington's Jalen Polk and UCF's Javon Baker in the early 2nd and 4th round respectively makes a lot of sense to pair up May with a guy he knows where he'll be when and that catches pretty much everything in his vicinity, along with more of a vertical ball winner. What I'm a bit worried about is the offensive line additions of Jackson Okorafor, plus a couple of mid-round picks. Can new offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt, coming over from Cleveland, set the table for a more dependable run game? Will they need to focus more on a quick-hitting passing game to protect that front 5? If they're worried about those areas, do we see veteran Jacoby Brissett hold on the fort whilst they work out the kinks? And when do they feel like it's time to get the rookie live reps? Concluding the AFC East now with the New York Jets, for them a pretty simple question: can the older veterans on this team stay healthy? I usually hate doing this, and literally considered saying that this would not count as part of the discussion during the intro, but really as I let this run through my head a few times, this is the biggest question that comes to mind when I think about what the 2024 Jets could be. On paper, this could absolutely be a team that challenges the big forces of the AFC, which the Chiefs were able to run through in one of the least inspiring offensive seasons, at the very least for them. New York has upgraded 3 spots along the offensive line. I can see more defined roles of wide receiver for Mike Williams as a big-bodied downfield target, and further on rookie Malachi Cole as a yak specialist in the mold of Deebo Samuel. And then of course this has been one of the premier defenses across the NFL, when they've had anything close to competency to complement them on offense. I mean, they just finished third in DVOA and EP per play defensively last year, despite Aaron Rodgers being the only one of 4 quarterbacks to not start multiple games for them. Having said all of that, we do have to look at some of the pieces that are supposed to help them compete for a championship this season. By the middle of December, the 2 starting tackles will be 32 and 33 years old respectively, and while Morgan Moses has been a model of consistency and health, Tyron Smith has only played 30 of 67 potential games over the past 4 seasons. Mike Williams has been a consistent member of the injury reports with the Chargers and is coming off a torn ACL. Chuck Clark missed all of last season with the same injury and is expected to start safety for them. And then of course Rodgers, after keeping the hopes of delusional Jets fans alive, but talking about how he may return from the torn Achilles within the same season, has to become one of the first players ever to be even close to his usual self the following year. As the veteran quarterback has said himself, if they don't play well, everybody's probably gone. Division number 3 now, the AFC South, first up with the Houston Texans, and for them a question is, how might they adapt their coverage structures defensively? This one is more about the nitty gritty of the situation and some of the context clues with the players this team brought in this offseason. If Stephon Diggs can get in line as part of the talented group of wide receivers, some of the adaptations we may see in the run game, and if the offense can take another step, with CJ Stroud pulling the trigger, are questions this offense will need to answer, and that's what people are generally more interested in, because of how spectacular the rookie season of this quarterback was. However, let's not ignore what head coach DeMeco Ryans, defensive coordinator Matt Burke and company did with this defense, which just based on scoring, improved from 27th to 11th across the league at a modest 20.8 points per game. They did basically swap Jonathan Grenard for Danielle Hunter coming off the edge and replaced linebacker Blake Cashman with former Titan Azeez Al-Shaair, but it's really prioritized on the back end in his past draft that has been taken note. After trading back from the first to the second round with Minnesota about a month and a half prior to that event, they spent 2 of the first 3 selections on Georgia cornerback Kamara Lassiter and USC safety Kalen Bullock. What those additions will indicate for me is actually wanting to go to more cover 1 and single high structures generally, as Lassiter was one of the elite boundary corners in college football over the last 2 seasons, while Bullock's calling cards were his range to play the high post especially, and the ball hawking skills that he brings. Looking at the coverage numbers from last season however, the Texans were near the top of the league in terms of the combined usage of cover 4 and cover 6, while being below average in cover 1 and 3. Part of that certainly was connected to the shift that we saw DeMeco Ryans make towards the end of his tenure in San Francisco, but also the type of corners outside of Derek Stingley Jr. and both starting safeties, Jalen Petrie and Jimmy Ward, having extensive experience in the slot and being better suited for split field looks. How early do we see the rookies, and we will see a shift in terms of philosophy in that regard. Let's switch over to the team that the Texans battled in the final week of the season for the AFC South crown, the Indianapolis Colts, and for them the question is, does Anthony Richardson have enough live reps to become a true superstar in year 2? When I valued the quarterbacks for last year's draft, and since we just mentioned CJ Stroud, feel free to invalidate my opinion right away again by having him third in the pecking order, even if I still had him as a top 10 overall prospect. I thought the guy that was mischaracterized throughout the process was Anthony Richardson. Calling him a raw project, considering some of the high-end stuff he showed in terms of pocket navigation, moving defenders with his eyes, and just a general feel for the game, always felt wrong to me. The term I preferred to describe him was inexperienced, since he did only start 14 games altogether at Florida, and it was the speed at which he'd identify coverage rotations and find answers to the test that wasn't quite up to par with Stroud or Bryce Young for that matter. Only getting 1 month of NFL action and not even finishing 2 of those 4 games before suffering a season-ending shoulder injury certainly didn't help in that regard. Nevertheless, what he did show during that limited amount of time was pretty spectacular. The decision making and accuracy weren't perfectly clean by any means, but if you go back to the Rams game from week 4 in particular, the way he was able to deal with constant pressure and deliver big time throws with Aaron Donald literally in his lap is something that was burned into my brain. Of course, some of the designed run plays drawn up by head coach Shane Steichen and what he could provide on those, keeping the ball around the corner, was stuff for the highlight reel as well. Speeding up his mental processing will be key for AR-15 to become a star sophomore, but the group around him is really starting to come together as well now. Having Jonathan Taylor behind / next to the dynamic duo for a quarterback will make the rushing attack that much more potent. Second round pick Adonai Mitchell from Texas is a pristine route runner for a rookie, and this O-line re-emerged as one of the top units across the league as last season went along. I think Richardson has the potential to be a dark horse MVP candidate. Bringing us to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and for them I've written down, can this offensive line take a collective step forward? A lot went wrong for the Jags following the 8-3 start this past year, losing 5 of the final 6 games and taking themselves out of the race for the AFC South, which seemed predetermined pretty much before they started the slump. The defense outside of edge rusher Josh Allen wasn't able to maintain the early success that we saw from them. The run game was sort of boom or bust. Trevor Lawrence and his wide receivers didn't always seem to be on the same page, and the quarterback himself probably was hindered more by the bruises that he was working through than the public is aware of. Having said all of that, the true core of their problems was the offensive line. As a unit, they finished outside the top 20 in both run and pass blocking grades per Pro Football Focus. Part of that was left tackle Cam Robinson only playing in 9 games. Center Luke Fortner took a significant step back in year 2, and Ezra Cleveland, who they traded for at the deadline, didn't make the impact they were hoping for a guard, finishing with his worst PFF grade of his 4-year career. Maybe more importantly, however, the run and pass game felt pretty segmented, and because of the issues in protection, they relied heavily on a transparent and imaginative quick game, or the occasional deep shot outside the numbers. Looking at this offseason, while they've largely overhauled the wide receiver room, they surprisingly re-signed Cleveland, and then picked up center Mitch Morse, who had recently been released by the Bills. The lad should provide some stability at the pivot, even if I don't love punting on a young player with positive signs in Fortner, but there's a lot depending on if Anton Harrison can take a step forward in his second season at right tackle, and what to provide as a unit overall, which dictates what they can even do from a design perspective. Closing the book on the South now with the Tennessee Titans, and for them we have to question, is this a 1-year evaluation window for Will Levis? This is more of a long-term question than about 2024 alone potentially, but really this is the main point to figure out about this franchise as we look at the signs they've shown us this offseason. At a period where many smart people thought it was time for the Titans to take a step back and take a slow approach to rebuilding this roster, with the change at head coach from Mike Vrabel to Brian Callahan, and general manager Ryan Carthon now having full control of the roster, after seemingly having won the power struggle with the former, they instead decided to go in heavy on this rookie quarterback window with Will Levis. They did allow one of the dominant running backs of this era in Derrick Henry to walk after 8 years in Tennessee, but replaced him at a very similar price point with Tony Pollard. They won the bidding war for wide receiver Calvin Ridley, and when cornerback L'Jarius Sneed became available in a trade, they sent the third round pick over to Kansas City and handed them the 4th most guaranteed money of anybody at the position. They also signed former Broncos center Lloyd Cushenberry on a 4-year, $50 million deal, and handed out some lower level contracts to Tyler Boyd and Daniel Brunskill on offense specifically, along with drafting Alabama's J.C. Latham, 7th overall, who they're supposedly moving over to left tackle. There's a lot of reason for optimism that Bill Callahan can turn around this O-line with the added pieces, and in how they've constructed this receiving corps, but will now determine if this was a viable strategy so they can be a respectable offense, and some of the contracts don't become roadblocks later on, is the development of Levis in his second season. In terms of arm strength, not needing the cleanest platforms to release from, and being one super competitive son of a gun, there's a lot to like about what he showed as a rookie, but winning from the shoulders up and delivering passes with more variety in terms of trajectory and touch that is demanded, he still has plenty to prove. So if things don't work out and they want a top 5 pick next year, they may look at this as a ready-made situation to throw in another rookie, which seems foolish to me. Bringing us to the final division for today, the AFC West, and we begin with the Denver Broncos. My question for them, can their young pass rushers become real difference makers this season? On the surface, this Broncos offense is where we'll see major changes, now that they unloaded Russell Wilson and head coach Sean Payton handpicked his quarterback of the future in Bo Nix 12th overall in the draft, along with bringing in his favorite target at Oregon at the top of day 3 in Troy Franklin. They'll have a new start at center and also restock the backfield a little bit. With that being said, watching Payton engage in lively discussions with Russ on the sideline and how public that broken marriage was, took the spotlight off a defense that through the first month plus of the season was on pace for the worst marks in DVOA, EP per play, and points per game allowed. They did ultimately save face a little bit, taking advantage of a poor stretch of quarterbacks towards the end of the year, climbing up to somewhere between 25th and 30th in those categories just mentioned. A big reason for the struggles under defensive coordinator Vance Joseph was the inability to stop the run on early downs. They surrendered an NFL worst 5 yards per carry, highlighted by the Dolphins gashing them for 350 yards on the ground and putting a 70 burger on them in week 3, as the perfect storm between disadvantageous alignments and fading effort. What's connected to that, however, is their opponents not even needing third down a lot of times, being tied for a league low 202 such situations against them, and the pass rush not getting home. Denver finished 29th with a pressure rate of just about 18% for the season. There is reason for optimism, however, as Jonathan Cooper and Nick Bonito combined for 102 QB pressures on just under 700 total rush opportunities between the two. The latter I consider as more of a designated option for longer downs. So who they really need to emerge in the final year of his rookie deal is Baron Browning, with flashes of dominance in 2022 and quietly racked up nearly identical numbers this past season on about 40 fewer chances, despite returning from a torn meniscus for the final 10 contests. If that young trio, together with third-round rookie Jonah Ellis, can take advantage of defined dropback settings, will determine if this once again can be an above-average unit. Next up, the reigning Super Bowl champs, the Kansas City Chiefs. For them, I'm wondering, how does this offensive tackle situation look like by week 1? Sure, we can wonder if one of the young corners, like Joshua Williams, can step up after trading L'Jarius Sneed to Tennessee, or if last year's first-round pick Felix Onwuzurike can become a bigger part of the rotation up front, while Charles Omenihu is recovering from the torn ACL that he suffered in the AFC Championship game. Regardless, defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo has earned so much trust in the way he's brought along players well in their careers and been able to figure out how to make the pieces fit together, along with the game plans he constructs to give opposing teams fits, that I'm just going to give him the benefit of the doubt to at least be a top unit to at least be a top 10 unit once again. The offense is actually where concerns appear much more valid, considering the volatility of the receiving options and in particular the tackle situation. Hollywood Brown will need to provide a more consistent floor for them, and first-round pick Xavier Worthy will probably serve a significant role at 165 pounds, even if he offers record-breaking speed, especially if Rashee Rice tries to further sink his career. Yet with the way Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce heated up during the playoff run, and how strong the interior three on the O-line is, it's tough to bet against them. The two spots to either end of that wall to supposedly protect Pat, however, certainly brings up questions. Last offseason, they made Jawan Taylor one of the highest paid right tackles in the NFL, yet he repaid them by his 20 penalties accepted against him, being 8 more than any other player across the entire NFL, and the worst PFF grade of his career. Meanwhile, long-term veteran Donovan Smith was able to cut down the number of flags against him a little bit, and did step up in the postseason, but through 17 weeks also put up his personal worst mark in grading. He's still on the open market, pushing either Wanya Morris in year 2, who started 4 games as a rookie and surrendered the pressure on about every 10th pass per rep, or mid-day 2 pick Kingsley Suamataia from BYU, who I believe has a ways to go adjusting the pro rushers into the starting lineup. So the Chiefs could be prime candidates to once again sign a veteran during the summer. Next up, the Las Vegas Raiders, and for them I wonder what happens if neither Gardner Minshew nor Aiden O'Connell are functional starting quarterbacks. There seem to be far more quarterback questions for the AFC side of things here, but that's probably a representation of the quality of the top end guys across the conference, which makes a situation like the Raiders that much more glaring. Especially if you're competing with Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert in your division alone, and the Broncos at least get the final of 6 quarterbacks in the draft, just before the silver and black went on the clock. There were plenty of rumors about them trading up to his highest pick number 2 and possibly reuniting now full-time head coach Antonio Pierce with one of the guys he was part of recruiting at Arizona State back in 2019 with Heisman Trophy winner Jaden Daniels. Instead, they stuck at 13th overall and surprisingly added another weapon, the flex tight end / H-back Brock Bowers out of Georgia, to combine with the guy they selected in the second round at the same position theoretically in Michael Mayer, along with veteran wide receivers Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers. They put some good faith in 30 running backs Amir White to take in the lead role left behind by Josh Jacobs, and we'll have to see how well some of the other young linemen that they brought in recently can hold on the questionable right side of the O-line. However, as we look at the 10 names around the quarterback position, many other guys across the NFL would love to be in that situation. And still, Vegas is relying on Gardner Minshew on the 4th team in 6 years as a pro, and second-year man Aiden O'Connell, who outside of that no-show of the Chargers in the Thursday night game, helped this group more when he was relied on less. What happens if they're just rotating guys through and can't ever get consistent play out of them? Is there a window to trade for Kirk Cousins if Atlanta does want to get the rookie quarterback on the field earlier? And does Pierce survive them tanking towards the end of the year potentially, despite the money they've devoted to veterans? And the final team for today, the Los Angeles Chargers. Who does defensive coordinator Jesse Minter identify as long-term pieces, and how quickly does he mold the unit in his vision? Finally, we'll shift the focus back to the defensive side of the ball. Even if short-term, the way this offense is actually being run may be more relevant for the success in 2024. There's an inherent disconnect between paying your quarterback $52.5 million annually and constructing an offense around him that, by new head coach Jim Harbaugh's vision, will be rooted in smothering your opponents with a heavy dose of the power run game. I do believe that condensing the formation and allowing Justin Herbert to push the ball down the field is a more viable strategy than spreading things out and putting pressure on your receivers to constantly get it right though, especially with them moving on from both Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. So while it'll be crucial to calibrate that offensive formula the right way over the course of the season, the viability of this organization's chances to ultimately compete with the Chiefs for the AFC West crown and beyond may be tied even more so to what this roster looks like defensively going forward. To my surprise, and contrary to some reports out there, they did bring back both Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack on the edges, with the two highest cap hits of any Chargers this year at nearly $52 million combined. They were fine with taking small dead cap hits from veteran D-tackle Sebastian Joseph Day and linebacker Eric Kendricks, however, along with paying nearly $21 million for cornerback JC Jackson, who even this previous regime acknowledged as a massive failed investment and traded. As good as Derwin James may be, when was the last time he's taken over a game or won a matchup against Travis Kelce when they've asked him to lock that guy down to justify paying him a total of $48.5 million over the next 2 years? They drafted the green dot guy off the Wolverine defense for Jesse Minter in third round linebacker Junior Colson, Alabama's versatile D lineman Justin Eboigbe in the 4th round to boost the run defense, and a couple of corners in the 5th round. They should have motivation to get those rookies on the field fairly early, and I'm interested in how much they turn around the roster on that side of the ball next offseason. But that's gonna do it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please make sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe for future episodes if this is your first time here. Once again, I'm happy to engage in discussion or answer questions down in the comment section. If you head over to my social media channels, you can follow along with all my content and get further in touch with me. Links for those and my page helloswithfootballtalk.com are down below in the video description. There you can find my most recent article on the league's most improved position groups, while the NFC video should pop up to the top right of the screen right about now. And when you head over to my last playlist, there's a good 6 hours you can listen to, where I provided short scouting reports and discuss potential roles for every single player that was drafted in late April, one division at a time. Plenty of analysis for you guys to take in if you're interested. The next 2 weeks I'll be focused on another 2-part series that I actually put out every year, the biggest breakout candidates among 2nd and 3rd year NFL players, which you'll be able to consume over my site in written form yet again. So until then, see you later, peace!